Hi, and welcome to the next video in the Falling into Winter Shawl tutorial series. Today's stitch is the pinhole stitch, and it has a little bit of a story behind it that I thought I'd share as to why I named it that. When I first saw this stitch, it was demonstrated and the person was speaking in Turkish. Google Translate didn't do a very good job of translating the instructions, and so I made them up from what I could see this person doing. And there were changes that I had to make to fit in with the English style of knitting. It reminded me a little bit, there's a little bit of a spiral happening here, and there's a shell that I used to collect from the beaches many years ago when I was a child. And it kind of reminded me of that, but I didn't know the name of the shell. And as I was knitting the pattern, it looked like a pegboard where there were holes and solid parts in between. I thought pegboard isn't a very nice name. And then when I lifted it, I could see the pinholes. And I thought that was a nicer name. Still not very pretty, but that's what it is. So this is what the pinhole stitch looks like in worsted weight. And then I've also made the shawl in DK weight using Hobie Amigo yarn, and this is what it looks like in the DK weight. I actually really like this coloured yarn. It was, no, I can't remember the name of it offhand. If I do find the ball band, I'll put it in the description box below. And you can see, I think, the twirl, the little bit of a twist in the stitch and the pinholes between the stitches. Thought it was a very pretty stitch, and it's a reasonably solid stitch. And so that's how this pretty stitch got its not so pretty name. Okay, I'll put this aside and we'll get started with the pattern. So for section 6, the pinhole stitch, it's a 4-row repeat, but there are 2 setup rows. And the setup rows are very simple. The first row is after the increases is just knit in between, and then more increases, and then knit again to the end. And the second row is basically just a purl row. So I've got my swatch, and I just did a few rows of garter stitch, and then I've also done setup row 1 and 2. So we'll start the pattern at row 1. So our pattern says to knit the first 3 stitches, which are our border stitches. Slip the marker and then do a garter left increase. And now we're at our red brackets. So we start the repeat straight away with yarn in back, which it already is. M1BW, make 1 between. So I look at the next 2 stitches on my left hand needle and I go between them. Wrap the yarn around the needle and bring it through, and so I've made 1. And now the instruction says yarn forward and purl. So I purl the first stitch on the left hand needle, and then we repeat that all the way to the next marker. So I take my yarn back, I insert between the first 2 stitches on the left hand needle, wrap the yarn, bring it through, bring the yarn forward and purl 1 stitch. Take the yarn back, and one thing to be careful of with going in between the stitches is not to go as we did in the last stitch. in the row below. So we don't want to be there. We want to be directly between the stitches, and it should be needle on needle, no yarn in between. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing is sometimes if you go in on a slightly straighter angle, you'll go into the stitches if you're going to knit it. So you don't want that. So I tend to make sure I go in on a bit more of an angle. Yarn around the needle, draw it through, yarn forward, and purl the next stitch. And we repeat that all the way to the next marker. So one more time and then I'll finish off camera. So I've taken my yarn back, go between the stitches, wrap the yarn and draw through, bring my yarn forward and purl the next stitch. So I'll come back when I'm getting close to the center marker. I'm almost at the next marker. I have 2 stitches left. So I'll just demonstrate that once more. We go between these 2 stitches on the left hand needle, wrap the yarn, draw up a loop, bring the yarn forward and purl the next stitch. Now we have one stitch remaining. Our instructions say to purl to the marker, so I'm not actually at the marker yet, which means I can do another stitch. So I go between the marker and the first stitch on the left hand needle, wrap the yarn, draw it through, bring the yarn forward and purl the next stitch. And now I'm at the marker. And it says to take the yarn back, do my right lifted increase, slip the marker, knit the center stitch, slip the marker, do a left lifted increase, and now we're at the second box which says ditto, which means I do exactly what was in the first box. So yarn back, which the first time it is, make one between. So go between the first 2 stitches, wrap the yarn, draw up a loop, yarn forward and purl. And we do that all the way to the next marker, which I'll do off camera. So I'm 1 stitch before the border stitch marker. I have 1 stitch there, so I take my yarn back, go between the stitch marker and the first stitch, wrap the yarn, bring it through, bring the yarn forward and purl that stitch, last stitch before the stitch marker. Take my yarn back, and then I do a garter right increase, slip the marker and knit the final border stitches. And so that's row 1 complete of the pinhole stitch. What we've got here, you can see that the make one betweens look like a slipped stitch. It's just elongated. It's got no bumps around it like the purl stitch. So turn our work and now work with row 2. In row 2 we knit the border stitches, slip the marker, and now we purl 1. So bring our yarn forward, purl 1, and then we purl 2 together, and we repeat that from the asterisk to 1 stitch before the next marker. So we're just purling 2 together, and you'll see that the groups of 2, the first stitch is the one that we purled, and the second stitch looks just like a slip stitch. And so that will always be the case, that the first stitch will be a stitch that was worked, so a purl stitch. So if you ever come across that when you're doing purl 2 together and the first one is a slip stitch, you know that you're off somewhere. So I purled 1, and now I'll just purl 2 together all the way across. So basically what we did in row 1 was double the number of stitches in each wedge, and now in row 2, by purling 2 together, we're decreasing back to the regular stitch count. So I'll keep going off camera until I get close to the next marker. I'm almost at my next stitch marker. I have 3 stitches remaining, so I'll purl 2 together, and now I'm 1 stitch before the marker, as I should be, and I'll purl that stitch. I slip the marker, purl the center stitch, slip the marker, and now it says ditto, so I repeat the instructions from the first set of square brackets. So I purl 1, and now purl 2 together all the way to 1 stitch before the next marker. I usually go into the first stitch and make sure I'm in there cleanly, and then go into the second stitch. Sometimes they can be a little tight. You don't have to get the whole needle through, just enough. So if that was as far as I could go before I feel resistance, and I do feel the resistance, as long as I can yarn around and come through, that's all good. So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not so easy to get the needle all the way through. That's my preferred way, to get the needle all the way through. But if you find there's resistance there, just the tip's enough so that you can go around and draw through the loop. Okay, I'll finish this off and come back when I'm close to the marker. So I have 3 stitches remaining before the next marker. I purl 2 together, and now I have 1 stitch before the marker, which is what I'm supposed to have. I purl that stitch, slip the marker, and knit the border stitches. So knit the 3 stitches. And that's row 2 completed. So you can see these look like purl stitches, but they're quite thick, and that's because we've got the purl 2 together. On the right side of our work, you can see we've got one of the little spirals starting there. It'll take a few rows for the pattern to become more obvious. So for row 3, we knit the first 3 stitches, slip the marker, and then do our garter left increase. And now we're at the first bracket, so we knit the first stitch, yarn back, which it is, it's at the back, make one between, yarn forward, purl one, and repeat from there to the marker. So that's the same as row 1. So yarn back, make one between, yarn forward, and purl. This slack, you probably noticed from the first row, gets taken up. So yarn back, make one between, yarn forward, and purl. Yarn back, make one between, yarn forward, and purl. And we do that all the way to the next marker. So I'll do that off camera again, and I'll come back when I'm at the next marker. So I'm one stitch before the center marker. I take my yarn back and again go between. This one was easy for me to mistakenly go into the stitch as if to knit. So just be aware of that this stitch is a little bit loose because that was our increased stitch from the last row. So just make sure you're not going into it and you're actually going between it and the next stitch. Yarn around the needle, yarn forward, and purl. Yarn back, slip the marker, oh no, don't slip the marker yet. Do your right lifted increase. And then slip the marker. And the reason we do that is we always want just one stitch between the two center markers, so just our center stitch. Slip the marker. I do a left lifted increase. And then I work box 2. So box 2 says with yarn in back, which it is, make one between. So go between. Now this one's going to feel a little looser than the others because this is our increased stitch from the row before. And it just feels a little looser, to me anyway. So going between the two stitches, wrap the yarn, come back, yarn forward and purl one. And we do that all the way to one stitch before the next marker. So yarn back, go between the next two stitches and make one. Yarn forward and purl. Yarn back, go between, draw up the loop, yarn forward and purl. And I'll meet back up with you towards the end of the row. So I'm coming to the end of row 3 and I have 2 stitches before the next marker. I needed to be just 1 stitch before the next marker. So I can make one between again and purl. And now I'm 1 stitch before the next marker and I just knit that stitch. So be aware of that we could have made another stitch here, and which is what we did in row 1. But for this one we don't want to. So we need to stop and look back at our instructions and it says to knit 1. And now I do a garter right increase. Slip my marker and knit the last 3 stitches. And so again, we've got the stitches that look like slipped stitches and then our purl stitches with the purl bump around it. So that's row 3 complete. We'll turn our work and start row 4. Row 4 is another one where the first set of brackets and the second set of brackets have different instructions, similar but different. So for row 4, we knit the first 3 stitches. Gosh, you'll be sick of hearing me say that. Knit the first 3. Slip the marker and purl 2. And now we're at the repeat section. Again, we just purl 2 together until we're 1 stitch before the next marker. So in row 3, we doubled the number of stitches, and now we're decreasing the number of stitches. So purl 2 together. And I'll do the rest off camera, come back when we're getting close to the center marker. So I have 3 stitches remaining before I get to one of the center markers. I purl those 2 together, the first 2 on there together. And now I'm 1 stitch before the marker, and my instruction says to purl 1. Then we slip the marker, purl the center stitch, slip the marker, and now we're ready for the instructions of box 2. Now I just wanted to mention something with box 2 of row 4 is that we purl 1, then we purl 2 together until there are 2 stitches remaining before the marker, and we purl those 2 stitches. When you've got 100 odd stitches in the wedge and you're just happily purling 2 together, by the time you get to the end of that wedge, you may have forgotten that the last 2 stitches aren't a purl 2 together, but are just a straight purl 2. So what I like to do is, before I even start that wedge, is just to take a needle with a bit of scrap yarn in it. And so 2 stitches before the marker, I put my needle through there and just leave the yarn there, so it reminds me when I get back, when I'm knitting and I see that, and I'll think, why did I do that? It just prompts me to look back. Oh, yep, I don't purl them together, I purl 2 separately. Another thing you could do if you didn't have any scrap handy is just to, say, pop a stitch marker on that stitch there. And again, that will remind you to have a look at your instructions. For me, I just like the little scrap of yarn. So I'll leave that there because I'll be talking to you as I'm doing this and I will forget. So I've done the center stitch. I purl the first stitch after that, and then I purl 2 together to 2 stitches before the next marker. So purl 2 together. And I'll do this off camera and come back when I'm towards the end of the row. So I'm coming towards the end near the stitch marker. I have 2 stitches before that strand, so I know I can purl those 2 together. And then I see the strand, look at my pattern, and it says purl the next 2 stitches. So just take that away. I don't need it now, and I purl the next 2 stitches. Slip the marker and knit the border stitches. And that's row 4 complete. It's actually quite a dense stitch, so if you're looking for a nice warm winter shawl, it's a great stitch to use, or for a blanket. I quite like this stitch. For the rest of the pattern, you repeat rows 1 to 4 2 more times. So not the setup rows, just row 1 through 4, do those again, then 1 through 4 again. And by the time you finish, if you've followed the pattern exactly from the beginning, you'll have 261 stitches altogether, 127 in each wedge. Gosh, we're getting up there in the stitch counts, aren't we? So that's why I say that this little piece of scrap yarn is a good reminder, because once you're getting towards the end there, you're going to forget. You just happily purl them 2 together. Oh, yep, I've got 2 stitches left. I just purl those together and then come to realise you need to purl them separately. So that's the end of this tutorial for the pinhole stitch. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.